Hello, everybody. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. I'd like to welcome to the stage my colleagues Paul, Andy, and Marketa, and we will get on with the good stuff, which is the discussion about mental health and well-being. We're going to actually flip things around a little bit, and we'll do a little intro to these guys actually at the end, rather than now, just to keep you on your toes. For those of you who are not familiar with me, my name's Bobby. I started a company called Wellwise. We're a workplace wellbeing, strategic diagnostics, and strategy development company. And we're really trying to make a difference in this space. And I'm accompanied by three fantastic people who are working in this space or related spaces as well. And we've got some really great insights and information to share with you today. We will talk about mental health because that's why we're here, but we're also going to talk about well-being because it's the same conversation essentially. We're also going to make sure that we explore both the risks of not getting this right, as well as the benefits that can come when we do tackle this effectively. And also, we plan to reserve some time for questions. And the other good thing is that we go into the break. So if we aren't able to reach everybody's questions, then please do come see us at the break, and we'll be more than happy to chat with you guys. So let's get straight into it. Andy is from the team space. He's a teams expert, and so it absolutely makes sense that the first question goes to Andy, which is, what impact does addressing the challenge of mental health have on teams and organizations?
This is a big question. What is the impact of addressing it? I guess also, what is the impact of not addressing it? And what is happening within teams? What's the impact of mental health or a lack of mental health and safety and well-being within the team? One of the most important things to understand about teams at work is everyone is there by choice. They choose to join that company, that team, and they're making a choice every single day as to whether they are or are not doing the work that is asked of them, subconsciously or consciously. And there are the potential for an awful lot of distractions around the team that will prevent them from doing the best work that they're capable of. One of which is their kind of personal mental health and well-being. But also the concept of the health of the team, which is another important thing to consider. There are enough statistics on Google. You can do the research. You can find whatever, there are lies, there are damn lies, and there are statistics. You can find anything you want to back up your theories. But some of the things that happen when teams are suffering are things like engagement. Employee engagement scores are influenced. Managers' time spent dealing with conflict in teams can be an awful lot, and I've done it. I've spent an awful lot of my time as a manager just dealing with conflict, which takes me away from delivering the work I'm there for. Decision making. Chris mentioned decision making. When you are suffering from mental health issues, you don't know what to do. You get very clouded. It can be very, very distracting, obviously, and that happens at a team level as well. So that there are many different things that will take focus away from doing what the team is there to do in the first place if the mental health and well-being is being impacted, both at an individual but also at a sort of systemic level as a team.
And Paul, there's a risk profile here and a degree of liability, really, that organizations have. What's your perspective on that?
Absolutely, and really just touching on what Andy was saying, it's from a business perspective, we really have to see this now as it's not a nice to have, it is a business need. And I think for most businesses, it's really bringing it to into the financial arena in terms of recognizing the impact it has in the business. And I think what we have to be mindful of is there is a duty of care from an employer's perspective to their employees. And a big part of that is managing the impact of mental health in the workplace. What we then have to recognize as soon as we start engaging with different elements of services to support that, that we are establishing some form of risk and liability. And so we have to ensure that whoever we're engaging with, whatever we're doing, is recognizing, the impact that that can have in the business, and recognizing, certainly in certain industries where there's safety-sensitive roles, that there is a need to manage that risk appropriately. And if you don't, there's a potential then risk of liability on the business. In some countries, it's a legal requirement. So UK, for example. And for any company not actively doing that and managing that appropriately, that risk can ultimately end up in significant cost to the business. So it's critical that businesses understand that.
And anyone to come back to me on this one, back to that Teams point, we're now in a world of hybrid, remote, global workforces. So where does that conversation fit in here from a mental health and well-being perspective in terms of team performance and engagement and all of that? Marketa?
Maybe I'll take it. So actually what I see on the ground when I talk to my clients is that this plays significant importance. So what we have seen that during the time of, the peak of the COVID, when everybody was working remotely, that actually the stress levels, of course, have increased. But also what employees started feeling is that they were detached from their companies and detached from the culture of their teams. And actually, really, the rates of the mental health have increased significantly. So there's absolutely a link. And then that's why we recommend nowadays our clients is it's important to give your employees flexibility. So maybe you don't need to force them to come to the office every day, but it's actually important to keep the touch. So at least sometimes they need to come maybe once, twice a week. They need to meet the rest of the team. They need to network. They need to brainstorm. They need to, it sparks creativity. It makes them feel part of the team. And all of this is important.
And what do you think is the competitive advantage here? If organizations start to really get this right, what do you think that they're going to benefit from competitively?
So, you would have all heard about the Great Resignation, right? I mean, reports are floating out there that, 1/3 of the people are planning to change jobs in the next year. We have read that 44% of people are active job seekers, so it's actually huge. And of course, partly this is caused by the fact that the market is hot, and when employees change jobs, they typically get at least 10 or more % increase. But actually, when we do the exit interviews, we see that many of them say, well, actually, the reason why I started looking for a job in the first place was because I lost this touch with my company. I felt my company is just using me to deliver, work hard, don't ask any questions. And that was the initial reason why they started looking. So, if it's just for the attrition, which costs companies a lot, because it costs a lot to hire talent, train them, make them productive. It takes several months before a new employee hire can become fully productive. So because of this, it's important. And then there's the whole other aspect of productivity, right? So there's a clear link between employee happiness and productivity. If your employees are not happy, they will not be as productive, and it will impact your bottom line.
Excellent. Thanks very much.
Can I answer on this? I think this is hybrid and virtual working is here to stay, and people do like it. You do have to have people get together as often as you can. One of the things I always say to people is, why do we use solitary confinement as the most extreme form of non-physical punishment? Is because human beings are not meant to be alone. We are social animals, and to separate us and isolate us is extremely psychologically damaging. So you've got to be really conscious of what's going on within your teams if you have people working remotely. And the temptation is to be very businesslike and to jump on the call, start the conversation about work, off that one, onto the next one, and all day long you're just doing that, and you're not nurturing the relationship and the health of the team entity. So the task really is to really pay attention to this stuff for these reasons. People will leave. The cost of replacing people is extortionate. You want to hold on to good people as long as you can, so take care of them. Make it a conscious and intentional thing that the team does to involve the people remotely. I work with teams, sometimes coaching, where you have some people dialing in, excuse me, and some people in the room. And it can be quite tempting for the people in the room to marginalize the people who are not. And it's partly my job to involve them, but to put it onto the team and say, guys, how do you want to be with your colleagues who are hybrid? How do you want to be when you're working virtually? What are the rules of engagement so you don't get that marginalization? And you are asking, how are you? You know, make some time in the agenda of the meeting to check in with each other and involve and solve the problems that might be there.
Really great advice. Thanks, Andy.
Sorry, Bobby, if I could just add in there. When we're talking about the hybrid workforce now, which is great, it's bringing flexibility, which is what people are looking for. We're already seeing coming through the EAP an issue of isolation, that really touching on what Andy was saying, that people, COVID, it wasn't a choice thing, it was we had to do it, and we sort of worked with it. It's now a choice thing for most people, but I work from home a lot, and it is very easy to feel isolated and feel disconnected from the business, from the company, and your interactions at work were always a major part of your relationship with the company you work for, and those are diminished for a lot of people now, and that's quite a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. And relationships are such a huge factor in the mental health and the well-being of individuals. As Andy said, we're social beings. And so I heard a great piece of advice the other day, which was at the start of these calls, ask everybody to share one personal success or story or interest and one work success or story or interest. So that you're getting to know the real human behind the title, the job title. Ultimately, those good relationships are what create great performing teams. So taking that little bit of effort at the beginning of calls to do that, it could be really powerful. Carrying on with the team discussion, Andy, how does a happier or more resilient team perform compared to one that isn't happy and resilient?
Oh, much better. Very simple question. Very simple answer. The point here for me is about being conscious and aware of the health of the team. If you think about people, and I think at work we're kind of a bit more head scratchy about this. We're like, well, what do you mean? If you think about people in your life, couples, marriages, friends, family, quite often you hear people describing them and saying, oh, that couple, they've got such a beautiful relationship, isn't it beautiful? And then there are other couples you might say, oh, they've got a really stormy marriage. Oh, we're all familiar with this kind of stuff. What you are articulating there is not the individuals within the relationship. You're articulating the health of the relationship itself. So if you have a healthy relationship, you are more free to express yourself, to contribute. You're not being held back by worrying about your position, or is that person got the knife in my back, or better not say something because the health of the relationship is damaged in some way. It is the same for work teams. Your team has an entity and an energy and a life that can be noticed, that can be articulated and can be improved. So, if you have teams where things are not going right, and also I think sometimes it's harder to measure and it's harder to articulate because a lot of it comes from the feeling part of the brain where language doesn't belong. And so when you get those things like, I just kind of feel it's not quite right, or I had a hunch, I don't know why I'm thinking this, but it's because there are no words to describe those feelings. So we often find it harder to measure. Businesses spend all their time thinking about the results, the bottom line, profit, sales, customer satisfaction, all these things, and that's where we focus all our time, and we forget to focus on the health of the team. And I think the answer really is to do so, is to find ways to tap into that, to increase the positivity, to deal with the things that are holding you back. But you can only do that if you know what they are, and that comes with having the conversation. It's really important that you start asking questions. And it's the responsibility of everyone on the team to do that and to have the courage to start to deal with what might be the causes that are holding you back from delivering the results that you're there to do.
That's really interesting, Andy. And I just wanted to bring Marketa in here because the sort of experience that I've been having in my work is that I'm finding a lot of clients are now asking me to develop leadership training, management training around people's skills, around team development and team cohesion and team creativity. Of course, well-being and mental health is a huge part of that conversation. So what have you guys been doing at KPMG in this space, either with your own teams or with your clients, that you've found to be effective?
So with our own teams at KPMG, last year we refreshed all our HR policies. So we focused on employee-friendly policies. And it started with the flexibility for employees. So now all our employees can work from wherever they want within UAE. As long as they get the job done. And for us, it's really easy to measure because, in consulting, everything is measurable. You either deliver or you don't. It's a good report, it's a bad report. So it's easy for us. But so first of all, the flexibility. Secondly, a lot of programs for employees, health checkup, yoga, some kind of subscriptions to applications to exercise. A lot of these programs, budget was dedicated to team activities at a firm level, but even the individual teams now kind of are encouraged to go out and do things with their teams. Everybody is encouraged to come to the office and socialize. So, all of these things, we are very big. And, of course, we need to do it for ourselves first before we go and implement to our clients as well.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Paul, anything to add?
Well, for me, in terms of engagement, it's really about the culture within the organisation. Your team is a reflection of your manager. Your manager is a reflection of the board of directors, and then the board of directors CEO. And so it does come from the top down. We know through working with companies, we have a range of companies, some that we know where it's going to be challenging to really develop well-being in that organisation because we can see and feel and recognise the culture is still not really that supportive or don't see it as a strategic part of the business. And then those that do, and we get a lot higher levels of engagement because, that's the culture drives and supports that. I talk a lot about psychological safety, and that's about you as an employee having a feeling of no constraints about being able and comfortable to talk about whatever you want to talk about with no repercussions. Chris was talking earlier about, the relationship here with employee-employer is like nowhere else. Yeah. My existence here as an expat is my job. If I lose my job in the UK, it's not great. But I still have my house. Nobody's forcing me out of the country. I have no timelines on, to find another job. Here, it's completely different. So the stresses of the workplace here are quite different, and we have to recognise that. And the culture is a massive part in terms of driving that.
Yeah, if I can add on that, I was working with a team yesterday. We had 13 people in the room, 12 different nationalities, very common kind of profile here, and we talked about vulnerability. This is, having the conversation in your teams is vulnerable. And people, may fear that level of psychological safety of being able to say anything, get it off your chest. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm having anxiety, those kind of things. And the reaction really was, there were lots of thoughts about it and about whether or not, some cultures are more comfortable with the concept of vulnerability. Will quite easily put their hand up. Other cultures won't, for lots of different reasons around upbringing and all sorts. And there are other nuances like rank and privilege within the group. I can't speak up, or I fear being vulnerable because it's weakness, and someone might think, well, he's not quite, or she is not quite suited for the job, and I better not say anything. There's a lot to it, and all of this is part of the conversation. And it does come back to this, one of the healthiest things teams can do is to create this concept of psychological safety, an atmosphere where people feel able to speak up, admit how they're feeling, question things, challenge, say we've made a mistake, safe in the knowledge they won't be judged or ridiculed, or there won't be consequences to their actions that are detrimental to their position and future. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes people think, well, we couldn't possibly do that. Where do we start? The analogy of standing on the edge of a lake, and you've got to go into the lake, but you don't know how deep or cold it is, or is there a current, and who's going to go first? I get it. Yeah. And I think there is this question around leadership. Whose role is it? And I do think sometimes this is where leaders earn their extra money, is being the one who shows the way to everyone else, is being the first one to step into the water and dive in. And so once you start crossing the edge and some people go first, then, okay, we can go too. We'll follow you.
Yeah, and that's the exact point of a leader, right? They have followers, by definition. That's great, and I think the point to kind of reinforce there is that when all that noise is going on in your mind of, dare I say anything, I'm spotting a problem, but I don't dare be the one that says it, I'm not feeling great, whatever those thoughts are, all that dialogue, all that rhetoric in your head is not adding value to the business, it's not helping the business meet its goals, it's not helping the team be a better team. It's just noise and distraction and stress, which a psychologically safe environment removes and makes all those conversations much more productive, healthy, and good for the business and good for the individual. So there's really nothing to lose. That still doesn't make it easy, right? But you guys have segued me brilliantly into our final sort of discussion area, which is around leadership. And I'm not sure how many people have seen, but Deloitte produced a really excellent report last week called The C-Suite's Role in Wellbeing. And there are two statistics that I would like to share with you from that report that really paint a picture of where we are at. Now, they interviewed over 2,000 C-suite executives in America, the UK, Canada, and Australia. So 4 Western countries that are considered to be pretty ahead of the game in this discussion. Having said that, nearly 70% of the C-suite are seriously considering quitting for a job that better supports their well-being. And in the same report, more than 8 out of 10 global executives believe their people are thriving in all aspects of well-being. So we've got a situation here where even in our most advanced kind of discussion countries and people that have been at this for a long time, huge stresses for CEOs to the point that they're genuinely considering leaving their roles, but a total disconnect with the experience that their employees are having in terms of their understanding of well-being and what thriving looks like. And that's a real challenge that we are going to have to come to terms with and tackle and get real about. So, Marketa, my question to you is, what is the role of leaders in engaging and driving this discussion, the action, the strategies around workplace mental health and well-being?
So, as we mentioned here already, so to begin with, they are the leaders. They lead people, people follow them, people look up to them. So the role is, of course, undisputable. But for them to be able to lead, they need to be resilient. And that's why we actually, when we survey executives, what you said that, many of them feel so much pressure. They would like to change job because, for companies that would look after them. They really, nowadays, we value the skill of resilience, because if a leader is resilient, they will be able to face all this stress. They will be able to bounce back. They will be able to react to adversity. If something negative happens to them, it will not change their sense of self-worth, right? They know that on the grand scheme, they can still manage, and what happened to them is maybe just a small bump on the road. So it's really important for the executives to develop this skill, and luckily it's a skill that can be developed. Some people are naturally born resilient, or they develop the skill as they go through their childhood, but it's also possible to develop it, at the older age. And really it's about kind of being very self-aware, being aware of your feelings, avoiding negative thoughts. If things are not going well, okay, it doesn't mean that everything is wrong. It's just, again, a small obstacle that I can overcome. It's also about cultivating meaningful relationships, so having a strong network of your family, friends, colleagues, because all those will support you. And it's also about looking after yourself in terms of your physical health, right? So eating well, making sure that you get enough sleep, that you exercise, that you meditate. And all of this will make the executives, but even any employee, stronger so that they will be able to face all the stress. And I think it brings me to the point that it's really not the role just of the leaders to kind of bring out the talk about mental health and well-being. It's actually a role of every single employee to look after themselves, to develop the skill of resilience, because it will really help them on the journey. And then there's also the role of a manager, right? Because if an employee is not okay, it's not that they will directly go to the CEO or CFO. Likely they will go and talk to their colleagues, and they will go and talk to their manager and say, hey, I'm not okay. And it's important that the manager gives this sense of security, that the employee won't be shamed, won't be marginalized because of sharing their feelings. And finally, there's also the role of HR, right? Because they need to set the right frameworks for the organization, the right policies to actually destigmatize mental health, to promote the conversation, to allow for the flexible working so that people can have a little bit more freedom in the way how they operate, and all of this.
Thanks, Marketa. Paul, I want to just come back to an area that you touched on earlier, but maybe we can just discuss it for a minute or two a little bit further. I think from my observations of organizations that have been taking a relatively proactive approach to workplace well-being, mental health, and these issues, there has tended to be a dominance of purchasing services, whether that be EAP like you supply, or sleep webinars, or nutrition guidance, or what have you, yoga, team building. How much of that is effective if the culture, the leadership, and the sort of overall mentality of the organization is not thinking about well-being and health strategically?
Great question. First of all, whatever you're doing in relation to well-being, whether it's what I see too often here is it's very dispersed, bits here and there. It's not a holistic approach to it. Whatever you do, it will be delivering a positive return to your business. And that's the first thing we have to make very clear to organizations. I think the thing, probably, I've been in the industry 30 years, the thing that still frustrates me now is we're waiting for that next survey and report that's going to hit it home that we need to do this. There's so much data out there that clearly states the financial value back to the business. It's a no-brainer. And businesses need to recognize that. So then, where you have organizations where they are coordinated, a more coordinated approach, where there is probably very clear policy within the organization around well-being, and that it is a strategic part of the business objective, then all you're doing is multiplying that return back to the business. And it's the more we can get organized companies, employees at that end of that scale, the better. But I'd say to any company, don't keep waiting for that research that is going to tick your final box. What we don't do now, I always liken it to smoking. What we don't do now is say, should I smoke or not? I'll wait for some more research. That's done. It kills. Yeah. Shall I wait for some more research in relation to corporate well-being and the impacts on the business? What you're waiting for, it's done. Get on with it.
Andy?
Yeah, I think I completely agree. I think marketeers will give you a full marketing campaign, above the line, below the line, all these different interventions and things, social media, print advertising, fantastic. No one does a joined up campaign for their employees' mental health and well-being and the status of the team. So yeah, firing the odd bullet here and there, something is better than nothing. Try and join it up. It's a suite of interventions with a rhythm that happens weekly, monthly, annually, whatever it might be. Connect the dots on the policies like you do with marketing, and make sure you're doing the right things to address the issues. I never forget, and I say this all the time to people, I remember doing a team building activity for a client, and they had articulated some real problems in the team. So we did this activity, it took all day, I ran it, and at the end of the day, everyone was leaving, and I was walking out behind these two ladies, and I said, have a great weekend. And one of them, they didn't know I could hear them, and one of them turned to the other and said, you know what, in the end, that was all right, wasn't it? And I was like, okay, great, I'll take that. She'd arrived with cynicism, and I'd kind of won her over. But the other one turned and replied and said, yeah, it was really good, but we are all still going to hate each other on Sunday. and I was like, what a waste of money and time.
Oh, shit.
So they needed to have the conversation about what was really going on. It was, it was the wrong thing for them. So if you're going to spend the money and time, find out what the right thing is. Do your research. Look at the options. What are the outcomes of the intervention that you're considering? What's the stuff you can do yourselves? What's the stuff you need external help with? There's a whole suite of possible things you can join up and do.
Just to add into that, just concurring with what Andy was saying around whatever initiatives you're going to do is doing the right things for the right reasons and understanding what's happening with your employees and in the workplace. What we know statistically from our EAP in terms of people engaging, around 85% of the calls we take, we're helping people with challenges in their personal life. Right. Yeah. So whatever you're doing in the corporate arena to support them, it's got to reflect that, because that's where the majority of the challenges are. And it's the everyday things, relationships, financial worries. It's all those sorts of things that come into the workplace. And that's what we need to recognize.
Awesome. Okay, so we want to give you some tips on where you can go for support. I'm going to start by saying any one of these three people is going to be a good start. I promised you I would do an introduction at the end, and here I am. So Marketa represents KPMG, who are offering various consultancy in this space, culture assessment, leadership development, etc., etc. They're also, I'm not sure if you guys saw, I'm a LinkedIn junkie, so I see this stuff all the time, but they've just done a partnership with the University of Cambridge to study workplace well-being, which will be a great thing for us to keep a lookout for the findings of their various reports. ICAS is one of the world's leading international EAP providers, but Paul actually came over to the GCC and the UAE specifically to adapt a relatively Western model to meet the needs of this audience and this region. And that's a real challenge that we have here, is that a lot of the solutions are coming from international overseas, and they don't necessarily understand the nuances of the cultural challenges and nuances that we have in this region. So some great work being done by Paul, and it shows in the engagement numbers that the businesses that use his services are able to achieve. Finally, Andy, the team space, as you've heard a lot of today, does a lot of work around team building, team cohesion, team creativity, etc., and working with team leaders to help develop their skills as well. All of us are on LinkedIn. Do add us. We're often adding, sharing articles, thought leadership pieces, asking questions, etc. So we love to connect with people in this space. And also, there's some familiar faces in this room. So we have a networking opportunity coming up at the break. There are people in this room who left their jobs, be that from the military, from big corporate organizations, from small startups, to develop businesses specifically in this space to tackle the very challenges that they were having in their own organizations that they were witnessing. So they've been there, they've done it, they've seen your pain points, they've now left, and they're trying to come up with something that can help alleviate those issues. So they're my pieces of advice. And if I start with Marketa and work this way, is there anybody or any organizations that you would like to recommend, Marketa?
KPMG.
Obviously. Paul?
Me, without mentioning ICAS. I think there are lots, as you just said, there are lots of support services out there. There is now massive tools available. We're talking about the metaverse and all these sort of apps and tools that are now available. Fantastic. Use them, but make sure you use them in a coordinated way, and make sure whatever you're using is at the very least evidence-based. There is a lot out there that isn't, so make sure you find the right providers.
Andy?
A couple of times today it's been mentioned financial stress and people are suffering with their personal finances, which impacts their work. A good friend of mine, Carol Glynn, runs Conscious Finance Coaching. She coaches people with their finances, so do look up Carol Glynn on LinkedIn if you're interested to speak to her about how she can educate your workforce on their financial well-being.
Amazing. Thank you very much. So we've got a couple of moments left. Oh, big question just went up over here. If you guys could just pass around the microphone, that'd be great. Hi.
Hi guys, Emma Burdett from Wild. Great discussion and excellent moderation. Thank you so much. We've heard a lot about psychological safety and speaking up and taking that ownership and accountability, but how important is intervention? So, for example, I faced burnout this year. I didn't see it. I was apathetic, depressed, had a mental health issue, and actually fell off a stage and burst into tears. And it wasn't until, a couple of people from my network sat me down and went, "Are you okay? You're not you, and what can I do to support you?" So the question is, how important is having that intervention from colleagues or friends? Thank you.
Andy?
Vital. Creating a culture where people, and by best definition of culture, the way we do things around here, right? So what's the way we do things to support this kind of thing? It's a bit of it's a two-way street in terms of the willingness to speak up, and creating permission, creating the space, consciously discussing it with people, and on a small level, and then on a larger level, but just saying, guys, it's okay to speak up, and putting in place the mechanisms and the opportunities to do so, whether it's just a friend or whether it's a trained professional, either within the organization or an external resource. Depending on the size of the organization. It is huge, like you say. I mean, we all have stories of our own or our friends where it's just a case of, once you can verbalize it, once you can externalize it, you can speak it, it helps massively. So I think it should be on the agenda for organizations. I have a friend in the audience who's here because his company is looking at this. They're creating a framework around wellness, which is fantastic. There will be jobs coming up for people as wellness officers. This industry or this movement is going to grow and expand, and it needs to, and it's something that everyone should take care of.
And I think just to add to that, the idea of leadership, sometimes we get confused with job titles and salaries. Anybody in a team is a leader, can be a leader. And that whole thing about jumping in first, sometimes that might not come from your manager. But if you feel someone needs to jump, someone needs to take that plunge, maybe I should say something. Please do, because as Andy says, once one person's done it, it provides absolute comfort and sort of removes those barriers for others to do the same. I'm very conscious of time. I've got several hands, so I'm going to ask to put your hand up again if you've got a question. Mark at the back. And then all the other questions, please do come and see us. We'll be more than happy to chat to you in the networking break.
Thank you. So my background, I was in the UK military and special forces, and I have suffered with mental health issues after I left. We talked here and touched a little bit there about rolling down from the top up, and the work I do, I always encourage CEOs to kind of talk down. But if we don't share our personal experiences, the conversation will never become normal. And so today, talking about this, and everyone here sharing, I have felt, I know that when I have conversations with friends and say, actually, today I felt a little bit sad, or I've really been struggling to push myself in exercise or work, they then turn that back and come, actually, yeah, last week it was bad for me, or I've been feeling this too, and it really helps and opens that conversation. And so I think the key change we can all take away is actively go out and talk. Like you just both mentioned, go speak to someone, tell them how you feel, make yourself vulnerable, and when you do so, you'll see the return come back a million times.
Thanks so much for sharing. A great point to end on. I'm really sorry that I don't have time to get to all your questions. I know we could be here probably for another hour talking about this. But it just gives me a great pleasure to thank my guests, Marketa, Paul, and Andy. And we look forward to networking with you during the break and after the other sessions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.